Welcome to the All Things Hidden podcast with your host, Christa Reynolds. Today's episode is entitled West Marin Farmers and the Plight They're Facing Currently, Part 2. If you like this type of content, please like and subscribe. We appreciate it. And now, your host, Christa Reynolds.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to All Things Hidden podcast. I'm Christa Reynolds, your host. And this is kind of a follow-up interview right now. I have a couple of weeks ago, I had the pleasure of meeting up with a couple of farmers in North Marin County, California, the Point Reyes area, and we discussed how we are about to lose 12 of our dairy and meat farms out there, which is, pretty critical for this area of California. And we're going to go into a little bit why that's so important, the history, if you will. And we're going to correct the record on some facts. When I did this interview last couple weeks ago, we met up with a wonderful Petaluma farmer, Stephanie Arin, and she does, I believe it's Dairy Girl Diaries on Instagram, and she's well versed and in this subject matter because she's a dairy farmer herself. Although she's not affected directly, she has been advocating and helping a lot of these farmers. And we also had the pleasure of having Albert Strauss from Strauss Family Creamery on with us, and he gave us a nice background on what has happened with these suits in and around these Nature Conservancy group and other NGOs and Park Service. There's a lot going on here. This is a decade-long fight and issue and controversy that has culminated just recently in January to the end of a second lawsuit, which we will get into, which is now asking these 12 farmers to remove themselves off of their lands within the next 15 months, which we've just carved out 2 of those months. So with that being said, it's super important that we talk about this because there's also a countersuit that may throw this last suit into mayhem. And so I have a wonderful concerned citizen. After listening to our podcast, he came to me and said, wow, Christa, I think there's some missing pieces here. And I know because this is such a complicated case and has gone on for so long, I wondered if you'd be open if I could come on and chat about what's actually happening here. I will try to cite all my resources based on much of the research I've done in articles I've read and people I've talked to. And so I am fortunate enough to have this individual. He has chosen not to show himself, but his name is Philip, and he lives in Marin County, and he's lived here and he'll let us know how long. But with that being said, Philip, love to introduce you, have you come on. You might say a few words about who you are and then why this is of interest to you. And then two, we'll head into maybe a little history in the Bay Area about the dairy world. So welcome.
Oh, thank you so much, Krista. Wow, it's a pleasure to be here. Actually, an honor. I've known Krista for a couple of years now, and I've always thought of her as a very, very brave and honorable and a person, but just an incredible researcher and somebody who just wants to get to the truth of a matter. And that's why I asked her to at least provide a little bit more background on this critical issue that we're facing right now with the farmers and the ranchers in Point Reyes. By the way, that has been going on. Farming and ranching in Point Reyes has been going on since literally the 1840s. So we're almost talking 200 years of agriculture in Point Reyes.
We were known for butter, right? Weren't we the butter farmers of the
We were,
West?
especially in the 1870s. I think this area provided butter for a number of Western states and territories back then, and it was prized as the best butter that one could get back then.
Right,
Um,
right.
so so there's a long a long, wonderful history of farming and ranching in Point Reyes. And so I think that one of the main things that people should know is that in 1962, that was when the Point Reyes National Seashore was created, and and President Kennedy signed that into law. Now, they made a deal with the ranchers back then, and the Golden Gate National Seashore decided that, and the federal government decided that they were going to buy up all of the uh, all of the farming land with one stipulation. In exchange for all the ranchers wanted to do was be able to continue to ranch, and
Right.
that was the deal. That was the deal. The deal was that they would sell their land to the federal government, and this Point Reyes National Seashore would be created uh, on one condition: they could keep ranching for as long as they wanted. Well, they did so for 60 years. And then in 20, well, actually, it gets very complicated. And Christa's outlined some of the complications because um, there was actually, and I also want to say that, as far as the suits are concerned, so in 2022, three environmental groups, quote unquote environmental groups, they're actually NGOs, non-government organizations, um, the Resource Renewal Institute, the Center for Biological Diversity, and the Western Watersheds Projects. They sued the National Park Service to block
Right.
these uh, ranching and farming leases, um, and they did so. Well, their claim was they wanted to return the park, the entire park, because the ranchers and farmers only have really a fairly small portion of the park for their ranching and farming. They wanted to turn the entire park into sort of a an open space, refuge for tule elk. Um, Now that had already happened in other areas in California, um, with really mixed results. Uh,
What
be
do you
that
mean mixed results?
well, in other words, there was uh, uh, it hasn't always been a success. So in other words, this has been done before, and it wasn't necessarily successful. Um,
Hmm.
so the in other words, there was let me see if I can find this. Yeah. Okay. So for
So
example,
why
in
don't you explain what were they trying to do? Just make the lands better for the Tule elk so that I know we lost some Tule elk out here in Marin County, but that was for a variety of reasons. There were a
right,
2 year drought, there were, different conditions. But when you say it didn't work in these others, why was that? Like, was it because of drought? What was it? I mean, do
well,
you know what I'm saying?
I'm going to quote an article by Peter Browse and Dr. Laura Watt, and this appeared in the Point Reyes Light just a couple of
Okay.
months ago. Okay, so according
Hmm.
to them, the park, as for the elk, the park has passively allowed their populations at Lemantor, which is in Marin County, that's in Point Reyes National Seashore, and Tomales Point, to suffer through unhealthy and artificial boom and bust cycles. The populations initially boomed as the park had neither brought back natural predators nor allowed limited hunting, as is allowed with almost all the other tule elk herds in California. Then, particularly in drought years, dramatic die-offs ensued. So this cycle, what they're claiming is that this cycle will only be magnified once the elk spread over the rest of the park. Now,
Interesting. Yeah.
and oh, go ahead, please.
No, well, I was going to ask a question. Like, we were in the history for a minute and we shot forward to these Thule elk, but didn't this all start because of Drake's oysters? Like, wasn't that the first thing to go? And that's where people started to go, like, what's happening here? They're starting to slowly try to remove farming out of here. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I certainly do. And in that same article written by again Peter Prowse and Dr. Laura Watt, and so those two, so Laura Watt's a professor at Sonoma State University. and Peter is the managing editor of they of a company that represents the oyster the Drakes Bay Oyster Company, okay, and is also currently representing the California Cattlemen's Association at Tamales Point. So
So
anyway,
yeah, tell us a little bit
so
about Drake's Bay and what went on there and when was that?
okay, it was roughly a decade ago, so we're talking 2014, 2015, and the Drakes Bay Oyster Farm was closed down, not because they wanted to close, but because of kind of the same general reasons. They wanted to uh, well, there was a controversy about whether they were adhering to some environmental regulations, um, but interestingly, the former superintendent of the seashore, Don Neubacher, said that this was all part of a plan. And I'm going to quoting him saying that plan would start with a closure of the oyster farm in Drake's Estero. Once it was gone, the park would stand by as environmental groups brought lawsuits against the surrounding ranches claiming their operations were degrading water quality. The ranchers, whose means are modest, would have no choice but to shut down, bringing the end to the 150-year ranching tradition at Point Reyes. So this is a quote by the former superintendent of the seashore. This is almost 10 years ago. So
Wow. So he predicted that
he
this would,
predicted exactly what would
the
happen.
domino effect. Yeah.
Exactly. And so, these two writers were, at the time were saying that this was probably going to happen. In fact, they said, I'll quote them, at the time, the park and its allies disputed that such a plan existed, claiming the oyster farm was different because it was in a wilderness area rather than the pastoral zone, and because the ranchers would soon be getting new 20-year leases, as directed by then Secretary of the Interior. So these two people challenged them and Congressman Jared Huffman to prove us wrong. And in this article, they're saying, it brings us no joy to report that we were right. Not long
Mm,
after the park shut down the oyster farm, environmental groups sued, the three that I mentioned. The first lawsuit in a string of them happened literally right after the oyster farm was closed in 2016. To remove, so in other words, the first lawsuit in a string of them to remove the ranchers. Okay. And then the
right,
park,
right. Now, if I understand correctly, Jared Huffman originally was advocating for the farmers, was he not?
he was. But Congressman Huffman has an interesting history because he was, before he became a congressperson, he was a lawyer for a, a a group called the National Resources Defense Council, which is a powerful environmental lobbying group. So
Mm,
you could say that what. So the question that these two writers were raising is, okay, was he representing his constituents, or was he representing his former you know kind of
bosses,
connections, connections,
connections.
connections, connections to these environmental groups, right?
Right,
And then
right.
and then the other question is, who funds these environmental groups? Because they have a
Got
they
it.
have a massive amount of. I mean, their coffers are very deep. I'll just say that.
Definitely,
And
definitely.
so then the question really is, and you kind of touched on this a little bit in your last podcast, is, well, why? Why would they do this? I don't know. But it does it. I mean, that question raises a lot more questions,
Well,
right? Why?
there's a lot of land being purchased all over America by very, very wealthy people. And, is this part of that? Well, maybe. It's whether it's an individual or a group of individuals working together. Um, you know, what's true, and this isn't conspiracy, it's just actually happening, is that we're not only losing dairy and meat farms out here in Northern California, but we're losing farms everywhere. Like the small
Yeah.
farmer all over the country is virtually going away. They're either having to just fold up because they can't compete price wise, with the
Right.
others. I mean, the biggest problem we have out here in Marin outside is that we're losing organic milk. And that is not easily produced in a lot of places. And this is one of the places where, they've had a lot of success doing just that. And so this is a huge loss because it's great to get milk from a massive producer in the middle America, and we've got a lot of those coming into play as all of these smaller guys, these smaller farms, these organic farms are virtually being, either pushed out like we're experiencing here in Northern California, or they simply can't compete.
Exactly. And I'm so glad you mentioned the organic aspect of this. You're so right. It's I think at one point, Marin and Sonoma counties were producing something like 40% of the organic um, dairy market. I could be wrong about that figure, but I believe that's what it is. Um, so, I mean, in other words, the history of organic dairy farming in these two counties is rich, and people value that. I mean, you talked about Measure J in Sonoma County in your last podcast. That that measure, which essentially protected the farmers there, passed by an 85 to 15% margin.
Can you
So,
remind our listeners what that was? What were they voting for?
well, I mean, essentially, and I don't know the details, and I'm not an expert on that particular measure, but it basically, you know, kept them from being bought out from kind of special interests, if you will.
Right.
And so, and I think also here in I got to say that I have not been to these meetings as some folks that you and I know and have gotten information from, but it seems that the public really wants to protect these farms. Not only the public in Sonoma, again, 85 to 15% margin in Measure J, but here in Marin too. But
Right. Well, a big problem, Philip, though, is that the public at large doesn't even know about this. And we discussed that in the last podcast too, that when these NGOs came in, especially the brokers, which were the Nature Conservancy, they basically had them all sign NDAs so that they could not discuss the ins and outs of these cases. And so for a very long time, I think since the original case that was drawn against them in 2016 to the latest one, they were not free to speak. They were not free to tell us, their community, what was actually happening. So we couldn't help them. But I understand that now with this new countersuit, that we can, and that's why I'm doing these podcasts, we can, as community members, there are call to actions, and we'll discuss those a little later, but there are ways in which each one of us can have a say here and share this information with other people and maybe, just maybe, save some of these farms.
actually, there's two countersuits. There's one by William Nyman, the gentleman that you mentioned last week, and
Yep.
another one has been filed by a lawyer named Giacometti. I also think you mentioned him last week too in your podcast.
We
Um,
mentioned him briefly, but please
yeah,
expound because his
well,
is really interesting because his is dealing with all the families that are being displaced. Is that right?
yes, yes, yes,
Okay.
and he's suing the Park Service essentially, or not
Ah,
he, but he's being represented by. I mean, he's representing, you know, the farmers and the ranchers out there. So he's been doing that for a long time. I mean, I have to say, Christa, I've been so impressed when I've done some of this research to find out who's really fighting this. And I mean, I have to really shout out a gentleman named Richard Halstead of the Marin IJ, the Independent Journal. He's written extensively on this issue. Uh, there's a really great independent journalist named James Lee Li, who wrote a just a really succinct and wonderful you know wrap up of this whole controversy. And what's interesting too is he mentioned something which I didn't see anywhere else. And apparently in 2019, President Trump signed an executive order to protect farming in national parks. That would have negated all of this controversy. But in
Wow.
2021, President Biden reversed that. Now,
Interesting, which
yeah,
allow
now
these NGOs to swarm
correct,
in.
correct,
Yes.
and yeah,
Okay.
and so and again, who brokered this final deal, which actually the and you know you mentioned that kind of non-disclosure agreement that the farmers had to sign. Well, that they were coerced into doing that because they basically were told if they didn't sign it, they wouldn't get anything, and they could lose their land anyway.
Oh,
So
so it had to do with the money that they receive at the
correct.
end. Ah, yep. It's
I
always
know
about the money.
it just seems like there's some real, I don't know what you'd call it,
Well, Steph,
darkness around this whole thing.
yeah, well, Stephanie said that. She said if they really cared about the land, they would have seen that the farmers care about the land as much, if not more.
Deeply. Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
because
Oh,
yeah, I mean, they've been, harvesting this land for years and years, and this is their work, this is their life, this is their family. And so yeah, it's been pretty, but we've been in question of this, climate plan or pandemic or hoax. We don't know what it is. Like we I mean, you can't argue that there's too much plastic in the water out there, and you can't argue with some things that we need to curb. But there's a lot that may be overdone in this arena for financial interests and personal interests to groups, personal interest groups, if you will. And that's what we have to decide, like what is truly the best for the communities at large and what's happening in those areas, and what has got the interest of deep pockets.
well, and again, going back to Measure J, I mean, at least the people of Sonoma County had a chance to vote on this, and they voted
Right.
overwhelming for the farmers. Marin voters never had a chance to vote on this.
Interesting. Okay,
You
because they
know,
didn't know. They
they
didn't
didn't they
know.
didn't know. And
Yeah.
again, this non-disclosure agreement, I mean, basically, the farmers were and ranchers were forced into this.
So
And
the two lawsuits are right now. The Nyman one is, I believe Evans Ranch is also involved in that. There's two farms. And they're basically trying to vie to keep their land and have it not be removed as a farm. And the other one, tell me about the other suit that you talked about.
well, okay. Yeah, again, this is from Richard Halstead of the Marin IJ.
Okay.
So he says the 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 Nyman or Neiman
It's a
Ranch
Nyman.
lawsuit, yeah, Nyman, okay, I thought so, is the second filed in connection with the Point Reyes National Seashore Land Deal. Earlier this month, Andrew Giacomini, a Marin lawyer, filed a complaint alleging that the National Park Service conspired with the Nature Conservancy to pay
Wow.
off ranchers to relinquish their rights to the 20-year leases and instead lease the properties to the Conservancy. Instead, lease the properties to the Conservancy and an
Okay,
NGO
that's
group.
oh interesting. That gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
And
and
And why
this
should they have access to this land? I mean, they're
exactly,
an international organization. It doesn't,
precisely.
and yeah, like I've never understood the power that they all have. I mean, I get that anybody can sue anybody, but I don't understand where they would have rights or jurisdiction to this land in any way, shape, or form. It's still California Park, it's the park service, and not the service, but you know what I mean. It's what do I want to say here, Philip? It's still our state park.
It
Like,
is.
why
It's actually a federal park too. I mean, in other
federal
words,
park?
yeah. And remember, it was created by an act of Congress and signed into law by JFK. Um, so, getting back to some of these NGOs, I did a and look, I can't. it is really hard, and as you very well know, Christa, to get really accurate information. So you can look at a site and it says something about these NGOs, but it appears that a couple of them out of the three simply get their money, all their funding, from just suing these kind of deals. This isn't the first time that these especially the uh, let's see, the Resource Renewal Institute. This isn't the first
Right.
time these guys have done this.
Right.
You know,
Using the legal system. And it's so interesting
yeah,
because we've never, right now in America, our justice system is under a huge microscope as being possibly fraudulent. And so why would they not use a system that we're not even sure is, here to serve the people?
yeah, and exactly. And another um, interesting thing is that this gentleman Giacomini, he actually uh, wanted to have the farmers and the ranchers to have more of a say in this. In other words, to not to be able to God, where is it here? To let's see here.
No worries. Take a minute. It's all good.
Yeah.
Everyone
Well,
gets to breathe. Go for it.
um, well, in other words, so a, a, a federal judge denied that and said that they could continue with this sort of gag order, if you will. Um, and I thought that was interesting too. I mean, why would a federal judge deny somebody the right to speak publicly about this? It just
Right,
seemed,
exactly.
that just
That's
seemed
the
very.
thing, like whose pockets are being stuffed with what? And I mean, I'm just throwing stuff out here, but as we said in the last one, in the last podcast I did with Albert and Stephanie, when you follow the money, it gets really interesting, who's who and where their interest lies. And it's a sad state of affairs that's happening in our country. And I think it's something that's being exposed right now. Like when I talked to my other interview, Jessica Barsotti, we talked about the USAID and how money's been inappropriately allocated from our own government out to sources with our tax dollars. So this all is kind of interwoven and interconnected in as we are slowly waking up to looking, and putting a spotlight on our government, on our branches of our judicial system.
Well, I mean, it just seems suspicious. So I found it. It's from, and by the way, if your listeners are not familiar with this gentleman, Richard Halstead of the IJ, I really
Eh,
suggest you
The
look at
Independent
his
Journal, correct? Is
independent journal.
that,
Correct. We're an
yep,
independent journal. Um,
okay.
so he's written several wonderful articles about this, done a really extensive research. So anyway, in one of his most, well, it was written in January, but one of his recent articles is called he calls this environmental terrorism, or actually that was a quote from that was a quote from Giacomini. He thinks this is environmental terrorism against the ranchers and the farmers. But so it says, prior to the announcement of that agreement, a quote unquote agreement, Giacomini filed suit seeking to allow the farm workers to be allowed to participate in the settlement negotiations. U.S. District Judge Maxine Chesney denied the motion, but Giacomini has appealed the decision to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. But I mean, it just seems like the um, the ranchers and the farmers who have, by the way, they've adhered to every, as far as I know, and I'm pretty sure this is true. They've adhered to every environmental regulation that has been put forth in front of them. I mean, the ranchers are incredibly clean ranchers. The dairies are again, many of them are organic and just produce really high quality dairy products. So, I mean, these are not just, factory farms. Far from it. These are small farms with a lot of integrity, with a lot of pride. Again, some of them have been out, some of these farms have been there for 170 years.
Not to
So far,
mention, like their milk and their cheeses are so delicious. Like, I mean, and you can taste it, like the difference
exactly.
in what you're getting in a store bought to like really getting this at the farmers market right off their farms. It's like incredible.
Yeah. And I have to say, Mr. Strauss, Albert Strauss, also wrote it, let's see, where was this? Where's this printed? Um, well, he wrote you could probably find this online, but he wrote a little editorial which kind of outlines the decline of the dairies, um, and the numbers, and just the like the for example, he says over the past 50 years, the Park Service has eliminated roughly 130 homes in Point Reyes, and another 75 are now at risk. Um, so the population out there is getting older, and and it, that just seems kind of weird too. Like, okay, so the obviously to keep farms going, you need young people to take over the farms, and some
Right.
and some some sons and daughters of some of these farmers who have been out there for a really long time have done that. Um, but uh, to continue this tradition, he says that the farmers need a lot. They need more support and less less lawsuits.
Absolutely.
you know,
Yeah, no
um,
doubt.
so
Well,
and
so Philip, where are we right now, and what can our listeners do outside of maybe share this to more people so people really actually know what's happening? But what's pressing right now? What is we Marinites, people in Sonoma, what can we do? Can in any part of California for that matter? Is there anyone we can email? Anyone we can call? Can we make our voice known somewhere?
I think the good place to start would be just the Point Reyes National Seashore itself, you know, because they were the ones who originally received these suits, and they kind of just caved, honestly, in my opinion. They kind of just caved after a while. Maybe they felt like it was just too much to fight these NGOs. I'm not really sure of the story. Maybe I mean, could they be also uh, part of this vision, this new vision of the park? Perhaps, I don't know, but um, and I would certainly contact Jared Huffman. Jared Huffman is supposed to represent the people of Marin, and in this case, he really, in my opinion, really dropped the ball because
Mm,
because just like in Sonoma County, the people of Marin County want these farms to survive. They want to have the good dairy, as you just mentioned, Christa. They want the good tasting. They want the organic. They want the clean ranching meat. They want to have um, chickens from and eggs from really good farms, right? They want healthy food, and
yeah.
by getting rid of these farms and ranches, you're eliminating a really important source of healthy food, and that's the base. I mean, come on, that's really the basis of this whole thing. And
Right.
then you go, well, was it worth it to eliminate? And I think most Marin folks here would agree that is it worth it to give more land to the Tule elk, or is it worth it to maintain these wonderful farms and ranches?
Right. Well, we
And I
have a
think
lot of we have a lot of mouths to feed, like, and this is important. I want to go back to the Point Reyes Light article by Albert Strauss called "In Preserving West Marin: A Call to
yes, call
Action."
to action.
Yeah, and so he talks about the ability, and I want to read it here because I think it's an important. He says to expedite the process, Marin should transfer the Coast Guard property to Point Reyes Station. Um, Oops, that's some, I'm sorry. Let me go further here. That's a little too Oh, here he says, local policies must shift to support the longevity of West Marin's farming community. Sustainable land management should include active collaboration between farmers, community members, environmentalists, and government to align on a strategy that balances food production, conservation efforts, and community. So there, he's asking, please contact Marin County Board of Supervisors to support this idea, which would be bos@marincounty.gov. So bos@marincounty.gov. So he is asking people to reach out. Now there's another, the supervisor, Dennis Rodini,
Correct.
is also someone that people should be reaching out to with their concerns. And that is Dennis, just like it's spelled, dot Rodini, Rodoni, at marincounty.gov. So again, dennis.rodini@marincounty.gov. So these are two ways to put your voice out there, and realize, I know that this may not be hitting your home right now, but it is hitting your home right now because you're paying a lot more than you paid 5 years ago for dairy and for meats. And it's going to get worse. It's only going to get worse as we lose more and more of these dairy farms and these meat farms. Everything will get exponentially more expensive and will become scarce. And this is a nutrients that our bodies and, not to mention, if you go out to this area and, one of their arguments was that, oh, farming is just ruining the land. Well, you know what? All the land looks pretty crummy a couple months out of the year, as the rains are coming through and what have you. But this land, has been in this usage for like 150 years. Like, and no tourists have complained. They've actually really appreciated. And they're saying they're doing this for tourism and for the Tule elk, and they've already shown that this hasn't really helped the Tule elk in other parts of California. So we're confused on the argument outside of, is this about land? Is this about, what are we dealing with?
Well, the fact that it was leased to this NGO is pretty telling right there, I think.
Yeah, it really is. It's
One
disappointing.
one last point that Mr. Strauss mentioned in this article is about the infrastructure. So, in other words, there are still ranches and farms in Point Reyes. Some of them survive. Some of them were given new leases, including Strauss himself. Um, but the problem is that they're all kind of dependent on each other. In other words, there's an infrastructure there, and so these ranches and farms are dependent on each other for certain things, whether it be labor, whether it be equipment, whether it be food itself, whether it be something else, right? So that's the other thing too, is that even though on a certain level Strauss was competing with some of these folks for business, he also realized the importance of saving them because again, all these farms kind of rely on each other and one another to really flourish.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, just as you talked about, Giacomini's lawsuit is also to help find housing. We're
Mm,
displacing a lot of families that were farmers. They were ranchers. They helped these farms for, 2 and 3 generations. And
absolutely.
I don't, as I don't know the exact amount, but these Nature Conservancy group who brokered this deal are to come up with the monies to move these farmers, move these families. And I don't know what that deal is. Have you read anything about what that amounts to?
Um, well, yeah,
It obviously
there's
wasn't
there's
enough if there's a countersuit.
yeah, well, I mean, what I heard was all the farms that they actually closed down or closing down, the total amount that they got was between 30 and 40 million split between all of them. Now, if you consider
That's
how,
including the movement of
yes,
the workers. Okay.
yeah,
Wow.
I mean, which is not much really when you consider how many ranches and farmers were involved in this. So,
Right.
uh,
In this present economy,
and,
which
and,
is
and yeah, Well, exactly, Krista. And when you also take into consideration that, I mean, that might be, I don't know, maybe $1 million per farm or something, $1 million per ranch. It's not much.
No, it's not.
So
Not if they want to, not if they want to continue to live in Northern California. It's
exactly,
nothing. It's
exactly.
nothing.
It's and if
Yeah.
they wanted to, even if they wanted to just move their farm or ranch somewhere else, there's no way that would cover it.
No, not at all. Yeah,
And
we're up against some pretty interesting stuff right now. And this just plays into a much larger picture that we're seeing, nationwide around farming, around our judicial system, around NGOs. I mean, unfortunately, this is a microcosmic event in a macrocosm situation that we're in right now. But the spotlight needs to be, on this because this is a huge loss, not only for us locally, but nationally. There's quite a bit of organic milk that gets produced right here that goes out nationally. And so
exactly.
much of our country will lose that as well. And yeah, the reason I'm doing this is because both sides of the story have to be heard. There's a lot of money on the other side. They have a lot of money to get as many articles written as they want, to get as many NGO people in here to show up at events and talk and blah, blah, blah. But these farmers don't have that. They don't have the time, they don't have the money. So it's so important that we as citizens give a voice to this and allow for people, because both sides of every story need to be heard so that the right outcome can come.
You know, just one last thing, Krista. There was a gentleman named David Rabbitt, Rabbitt, who is on the
Mhm.
Sonoma County Board of Supervisors. And
Okay.
back in late January, he wrote an op-ed for the Press Democrat. And so he said that these lawsuits that are filed against the Park Service and then eventually the farmers and ranchers are over items where federal, state, or local governments already exercise regulatory oversight. A right to farm ordinance should include a shield provision that protects farms from lawsuits if they are in good standing with regulatory authorities. And all of these farms and ranches were in good standing with
Right.
regulatory
Well, but the
authorities.
NGOs didn't, they said they weren't, and they went out of their way to try to prove that. And
Yeah,
I mean,
and
that's how they won these suits. I mean, but were they telling the truth? I don't know. I don't know all the
it's a really
evidence.
good question. I mean, I don't know if that's how they won the suit. I think they well,
Well, Stephanie said as much that they would say, okay, you need to do this. They would do it. And then they go over to the other side. No, but you have to do it over here. Like, and they're like, why didn't you tell us when you told us to do it here that we had to do it over here? And they just kept finding ways in the suit
mm,
to prove that the
mm,
farmers weren't abiding by the regulations. And yet it was
oh
like
man.
it was almost like they could do nothing right because and the other side of it is because it is state park land, they can make it super difficult for these farmers because they have put in all these crazy regulations that make it impossible for them to move in certain directions that they need to go with the farming because it's restricted. And so they said they said on top of it, it's been just really, really hard ever since they made this
Mm,
deal with the Park Service. It's been a problem ever since. Like, and it was regretted back when the original deal was made that giving their farms away under state regulatory and federal regulatory was really the beginning to their demise of these farms because they made it kind of impossible. They would just up the ante on what they needed to do. And it was like they couldn't ever succeed. It's like they could never succeed because it was always, nope, jump this high. Nope, jump this high. Okay, wait, come over here and jump this high. And the poor farms were like, oh, we just need to work and produce. Like we're producing really good qualities. That's what I heard. So it made it
Well,
really hard
and
for
in
them.
in the Neiman suit, um, they actually state that the National Park Service intends to impose restrictions that will make continued ranching economically difficult, if not entirely non-viable. These
Yep.
include restrictions on the number of animals allowed, composting, and cover cropping. The suit also challenges the legality of the National Park Service decision to remove fencing that will restrict Tule oak from some areas in the park being used for agriculture.
Yes, thank
Um,
you. Well said. That's what I was trying to get at. I couldn't specify it, but you did that beautifully, so that people could understand exactly what I was referring to. But yeah,
yeah,
it's a problem. I
I
mean,
know.
it's like we should not have to dance, not to their song music. We should dance to our music, I mean, they've been around for 150 years. They should be able to create and produce what they've been producing. And so anyhow, we're, what are your final words? What would you like to put out there, Philip, since you
Oh,
asked for this? Like what would you like to say to everybody? How would you like them to do any call to action, anything that would be helpful?
well, I think you mentioned it before, Krista, in terms of getting a hold of these board persons and Dennis
Rodini.
Rodini. Yes, that would be a great place to start. I think even just expressing your, I don't know, your dismay, your dissatisfaction, your concern about this issue with Jared Huffman, or again with the Point Reyes National Seashore. Um, it it just didn't seem like that. I mean, none of the farmers or ranchers that were involved in this are happy now. They didn't
Right.
they didn't want this,
Maybe
and
we could get Gavin Newsom to interview Albert Strauss.
I would love that.
He seems to want to interview, his opponents. So that might be nice. Maybe we can push that one.
I just want to I, I just want to when you and I both go to the Marin Farmers Market at the Civic
Right.
Center in Santa Fe, and every weekend that it's got sunny, it's just packed. So there are a lot of people in Marin who get there who really care about clean food and good food and nutritious food, and this is gonna harm the farmers market. Is gonna because I mean, again, all these different food producers are kind of interdependent. Um, so yeah, I would just like to see that these wonderful farms survive and thrive, and I think they need more support.
Absolutely. And let us be an example for the rest of the country so that we can, not have other parts of the country go through this, that are starting. And many parts have lost farms already, but we can't afford to lose any more. We
Mm,
really can't. Not for food production, not for the amount of mouths we have to feed here in this country. This is a bigger issue than just, good dairy and organic. This is happening in a lot of different places.
mm.
Unfortunately, these NGOs have a lot of money, they have a lot of know-how, and so I'm inviting anybody who has gotten to this point and listened to please share this with others that let them know what's going on, let them, make, have a call to action, show up at your local farmers markets, really support them, support your farmers, support what's going on. Thank you so much for listening. Philip, thank you for coming on and sharing
Thank you
all
so much for
your
having me. Yeah, thank you so
knowledge
much.
and wisdom. It's been lovely. You've got a great way of explaining all of it, so I appreciate that. And please stick around for a little bit of a meditation. It's always nice to take some deep breaths after you deal with a subject that is pretty heady, pretty mental, and a little distressing, when you think about it. So with that, take a deep breath, we'll ground. Join us for meditation in a minute. Thank you for joining us. All Things Hidden podcast.
And now a meditation by Christa Reynolds. This is a repeat, but it's very pertinent to today's subject.
Welcome, everyone, to another meditation. When life seems on the outside to appear really difficult, possibly unfair, like our podcast today, it's really nice to know that we have tools like meditation, where we can sit and ground and somehow try to make sense of the things we are hearing in the outside world that may not resonate well with what's going on inside of us. There might be a disconnect. So let's allow ourselves for this meditation to just come again to a seated position, to find our way into our bodies as we're sitting up tall. So feel like your spine's in, your heart's lifted, your shoulders are rolling back, and your sit bones are grounding. And now let's engage the breath. With your mouth closed, Ujjayi breathing, slowly draw breath in. And when you're ready, slowly let that breath out, blowing it out or releasing it out the back of the throat through the nose, and feel your shoulders dropping, your belly softening, and your sit bones grounding. Again, slowly breathe in through the back of the throat, through the nose, mouth closed. Feel your body filling with prana. When you're full, release that breath softly out the back of the throat through the nose or blow it out, and just feel the various gripping and holding patterns in the body, releasing, grounding you. Again, mouth closed, draw breath in. Keep filling, feel your spine in, your heart elevated. Take it up into the space between the brain and skull. And as you transition to an exhale, feel your brain kind of softening away from the skull, release pressure around the forehead, around the eyes, around the jaw. And if you haven't dropped your gaze or closed your eyes, please do, and start to feel your body melting into center. Breathing in and breathing through. We're going to take you on a little journey. As you breathe in and breathe through and you feel the vastness of space and time inside of you, we are not limited by the physicality of this body. For it is through our breath that we come to know that we are spirit, and that spirit moves in and out of the body. So we breathe in and breathe through, and we connect with our solar plexus. That is our third chakra. And it is there that we have what is the eternal flame. This third chakra is governed by fire, and there is a flame that never goes out inside of us. And even when we move beyond this world, beyond our physical form, this flame is eternal. And it travels on. It travels on to our next incarnation. It might be just in spirit form for a while, or we might take another body right away. It depends. So allow yourself to just breathe into this third chakra. Feel your flame. Breathe out, just ground, and feel the fire at your center. This fire gives you courage, gives you strength. It allows you to possibly do things you thought you couldn't do, to take risks, and just to have the energy to get up and get it done each day. So just breathe in and breathe through and just really acknowledge this. So while you're in your third chakra and you're looking into this beautiful flame, be it large or small, however it comes into your mind's eye, I want you to imagine that in that flame is a very far off place, a place you may have already visited, but maybe you haven't. The land is called India, and you are walking through a beautiful town in India, and there are lots of people. More people than you're used to, for the streets are filled. People are walking every different direction. But what's interesting is when you raise yourself up a little bit and you look out a block in one direction or the other, you all of a sudden notice that there are cows walking amongst the people. And not a herd of them, but rather just a single one here and a single one there. So I want you to imagine as you travel and you walk that you want to go greet one of these cows. Make your journey. And even though you might have hesitation because you're not used to being around cows, take a moment just to have courage in this third chakra. And imagine that you put your hand on the side of its neck and you make a connection with it through your eyes to its eyes. And you let it know that you see it, you feel its beautiful sacred energy. And while your hand's on there, this beautiful cow tells you its story. Its story of one that allows them to walk freely during the day, to just roam as they see fit, to go wherever they want to go. And they are deeply respected wherever they go. And then they know how to return home at night to the family that houses them, that feeds them. And then they know to wake up in the morning and provide, to give and to do the work that they're meant to do. They allow themselves to be milked. They give milk to their community. And once their job is done, they head back out and they roam the streets of India. And you can feel the story, and they tell you again and again, I love my life because I am deeply respected. I am seen as sacred because I give substance, I give life, I roam freely, I have a family to return to each day. And the cow reminds us that this is all available to us, each one of us. This work, this family, this freedom. So I want you for a moment, while you're just standing next to this beautiful cow, to breathe this work. Breathe this family. Breathe this freedom into your body. And let yourself just ground in knowing that you are sacred, just as this cow is. You are free, just as this cow is. You have family, even though it may not be your blood family. You have family around you, people who care about you, love you, and you get to provide the same for them. And you have a place called home, a place deep inside of you that you get to return to each night as you rest, breathing in and breathing through. And you sleep well because you know you are seen as sacred, and you know you are respected just as these cows are. There's deep respect. So just breathe in and breathe through as you return back away from your little journey, thanking your sacred cow, thanking India, traveling back, if you will, into this body, into this time, into this space. And you can take this beautiful message with you, breathing in and breathing through. Nice breath in. Satnam Namaste. Thank you for joining us. All Things Hidden podcast.
If you enjoyed this content, please like and subscribe to the All Things Hidden podcast. Thank you. This show and many others is brought to you by Madmana Studios. For more information, contact us at latham@madmanastudios.com. That's LATHAM at Madmana, MADMANA Studios.com.